Thinking about self-publishing and don't know where to start? Join the Spa Girls each week, 30 minutes of honest advice, tips and resources. I'm Trudy J and I'm here with Cheryl Phipps.
Hi there.
And Shar Barrett.
Hello.
Wendy has gone off sick. Hopefully she's okay.
Yes.
We maybe
she's just sick of us.
She could be just sick of us. Or we could be bringing the ambulance for her in the middle of this podcast. Who knows?
I said she was pregnant, but she wasn't happy about that. She actually didn't find that amusing.
So anyway, you've just got us. You don't have the delightful Wendy to listen to today. So this episode, we thought we would talk about getting it right from the start. And what we mean by that is your first book, how to basically create a first book that has the most chance of being successful. And what we mean by successful is one that is going to sell and make you money in a commercial sense, and not so there's lots of people writing for different reasons. And so if you're writing your memoir because you want to get it down, or you're writing whatever you're writing because it's the book of your heart and you just want to get it out, and that's kind of not what we're talking about here today. What we are talking about is writing books that are going to be commercial fiction that you're going to be able to go out there and sell. And we want to help you have the best chance of making that happen. So we're going to give you some advice on how to do that right from the very beginning.
And we have probably talked about a lot. Well, we have talked about a lot of this with other guests as well through the course of the 5 years that we've been doing podcasts. But this is putting it all in one place. So for new authors, or even just people wanting to start a new series, maybe getting it right from that very first book, that this is what we're all about today.
Exactly right.
So and we would say too, just regarding series, that your best chances for success, and certainly it's echoed by pretty much all our guests, is a successful series is an easier, not easier, I shouldn't say that, is a much better bet, shall we say, for success selling than trying to sell a whole lot of disconnected standalone books. So
well, there's a stronger read through between the books generally, because you've got a series that gives them more of a reason to want to go to the next book if they love the original book. Because if it's a standalone, I mean, it does. People will read a bunch of standalones because they're by the same author. I mean, I would do that, but it's just a little bit hard to sell because I have to then go into the same world and I have to be convinced that this is a world that I want to read in or whatever. Whereas if it's the same world, same familiar characters, you know that you're going to like it. It's an easier proposition, and it's easier for advertising and things like that. So that would be our first point. Right from the start, you want to think about what is the series that you're going to write, not just what is the book that I'm writing. Would be the very first place to start. And then we're talking about genre and the tropes within that genre. So what I would suggest is that, for example, romance is the number one selling genre on most of the platforms, if not all of the platforms where you can sell ebooks particularly. I remember we had the Draft to Digital Man show us a nice little graph at one of our conferences. I think it was last year, obviously it wasn't this year, where romance was like more than all the other genres combined. So I mean, obviously we're all biased here, but I would consider that probably romance is your best bet in terms of picking a genre to write in. But just when you're looking at the genre that you're going to write, just take that into account. Like, for example, memoirs, poetry, not huge sellers, not something that you're going to make a significant amount of money on unless you are someone like a Kardashian or a...
Point, actually,
some memoirs are going to sell,
as we're not, as we're just normal folk.
Don't expect.
And I also think when you're talking about genres, we're talking about subgenres as well.
So
if you can niche it down a bit better, but finer, that is way better, so that people know what they're getting when they get your book. And you shouldn't have to fit it into somewhere. It should be a natural fit.
Don't try and shoehorn something in there. That's not a good thing.
So think about it before you start writing. Don't try and shoehorn it after. And people are really afraid to niche, and it's just such a well-known marketing thing that actually niching it down as tight as you can will help you sell. It's not that you're trying to...
An example of that? So for somebody listening, what would be an example of that?
of where you're niching down a book or specifically. So instead of saying that I write contemporary romance, think about what kind of contemporary romance. Is it small town? Is it is it paranormal? Is it small town paranormal contemporary? Like you've just got to really, really dig down into it.
Is it, for example, I don't know, Oregon cowboys, or it's like getting down to that.
And is it sexy or sweet? Like those kinds of things. Like if you're writing a sweet book, it's very different to the kind of tropes and the things that you're going to have in there than in a sexy book. So just know that kind of stuff. So for example, in urban fantasy, so that in urban fantasy, it seems like, oh yeah, that's a genre by itself, but no, there's actually subgenres within that. There's people in urban fantasy who will only read a male protagonist versus the female protagonist. There's people in urban fantasy who hate the romance. They don't want to single out, or if there is a romance, it has to be a very, very small part of the story. There's other people here who want all the romance, and it's all about the romance. So you've got to know those kinds of things within your genre as well. So don't just assume that you know what you're doing.
You've written a romance that can go everywhere. It's not like that.
And I think when we start off, the tendency is to take pieces of books that we've loved before as an inspiration, shall we say, and kind of do this kind of mixture, or kind of a mashup, of it's got a little bit of this, and it's got a bit of mystery, and it's got a bit of romance, and it's a bit of this and a bit of that. Thinking it's going to, like you say, Trudy, going back to that being afraid to niche, thinking it's going to appeal to a wider audience, but in actual fact, it's a lot harder to find an audience that way. You're really setting yourself up for a long haul there. It can be very, very difficult with a genre mashup, or even just a trope mashup.
Please don't do that. Please don't mash up. Make it really clear, really simple. Do it.
Don't overcomplicate it, eh?
So one good way to do it is to look for comp books or complementary books in your genre. So if the kind of books that really appeal to you and the kind of book that you want to write is, for example, like what's popping to mind is Nora Roberts, let's say, although she's probably a bad example. Let's think of someone who is, let's say,
what about Wendy?
Okay, let's go for Wendy. So if you like Wendy Vella's books and you want to write a historical romance in the same vein as she does, look at her book, read through the book, look at the kind of tropes that she puts across in her books. And then maybe look for other books that are similar as well, just to make sure that she's not the only one writing in that genre and it's kind of very niche. Like look for several books and just try and look around for the on those books and see how they're doing. Like look for her most popular book, look for the book that has the highest ranking, look what is the trope that's being used in there, what is the genre that's fitting in, what is the categories that book is in on Amazon, and try and sort of build up a kind of feel for what kind of books are selling out there in the market. Because
try really hard to focus on independent authors and not traditionally published authors. So basically, if you're looking down the particularly on the Amazon or any of the different platforms information, you'll see the publisher name. Now, a lot of indies do have a publisher name, their own publishing house. But if you see things like Macmillan or Berkeley or whatever, that's traditionally published. You'll get to know there's only about a few of them, but try and focus really hard on the independent indies. It's a different marketing to traditional, and know what you're looking at.
So do that research there, find other ones, make sure that there are other ones out there, but niche it down as far as you can. So if it's historical romance that you're writing, is it Victorian or is it Regency? Is it sexier or is it whatever? I'm trying to think what's sweet. I've lost my words. Is it one of those, like there's all sorts of different historicals. There's the historicals that have to be absolutely historically accurate, or there's the ones that are a little bit more modern sounding because they're appealing to the modern audiences. Like which of those are you aiming at? Are there the ones that only have the dukes and the lords, or are the ones that there's a lot of those historical romances that talk about people who are kind of the bastard sons, or the the next sort of level down, and there's only so many aristocracy that people can get together. I mean,
well, you say that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
How many thousands of books? And I think there's like 100 aristocracy families, they reckon. But anyway.
That's the reality, Trudy. This is
yeah,
fantasy.
no, we're not. Yeah, sorry, we're not talking about reality.
And by the same token, don't make it so obscure that nobody's ever going to find it, because although it is a romance and it is historical, but somehow along the way it's become some kind of steampunk or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, when you do that, then you narrow the readers down to
nothing.
Yeah,
so
you're
looking
try
for
and find them.
Yeah, you're looking for, and this is what our K-lytics man Alex Newton talks about. You want a genre that has the readers and there's a lot of interest, but hasn't hit that kind of level where there's lots and lots of books in it. So yeah, you're trying to find something that's it can be tricky, but I mean that would be another example. Like buy one of his reports in the genre that you're thinking of writing in, and have a look and see what is popular and what's happening, and use it as a guide for something there. So if that's the genre, there's also the tropes that you want to think about. Now tropes are obviously the kind of the how would you describe a trope? Like the story, the theme?
I would describe it as like the flavor or circumstances that you know that you're getting. For example, mail order bride. You know, it's
so obvious, isn't it?
Take place. Yeah, and it's. I mean, some people say they're cliches, but what they are is they're kind of expectations of that particular genre or that particular genre's readers. So
it's a flag, isn't it, to say, is this what you read? You'll like this.
And people know what they read. I know what I like to read. I know what I won't read, and I like to be told,
Yes. I mean, there's that site TV Tropes, which has got a whole lot. I mean, that's for television and movies, obviously, but that's if you're struggling to articulate something, which clearly I am at the moment, that's a place to start. But the other thing is, go back to, particularly if you're writing romance, think about the fairy tales, Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, those are real tropes. And so Sleeping Beauty. So putting those in a modern context or a historical context
is a fun way to do it.
Yeah. But again, similar to mashing up genres, don't mash up your tropes. Like it's easier to keep it simple. Like we talked to Cora Seaton and she did mail order or email order brides. So
cowboys. Although she did have cowboys as well.
Yeah.
Sometimes you could have like the billionaire's next door baby.
Yeah. Exactly. But it's when we're talking about when you're starting out here to give yourself the best chance for commercial success, and sometimes at the old KISS principle, keep it simple, sweetheart, is probably a little bit easier to
nicer way of saying that KISS principle. I like that version much better than the other one. And the other point to make with tropes is to go with the most popular one. So we're talking to Zoe York, and she said to us, talking about, she had this first book in the series, and then she wrote the later ones, and realized that her second book in this particular series, I don't remember which one it was actually the more popular book, but it was also had the better trope in it. It had, I think maybe, I can't remember what it was, but let's just say it was enemies to lovers, right? And that is a massively popular trope. So for example, we're writing romance, so an alpha hero versus a beta hero, like you kind of would probably want to go with an alpha hero, and I would think something like a Cinderella story or an enemies to lovers story or a secret baby story or whatever, but those, there are certain tropes that are the most popular tropes, and they're that popular for a reason, because people love reading them. So go with one of those strong tropes as the first book in the series, because it's going to be the first book that people come to you for, and then that's what's going to lead them into later books in the series. Don't write a random book and then go, oh yeah, but the second book is better. Like
that's not going to help you much.
No, it's really not. And that's because, and the reason for that is because there's so many books out there. First of all, readers aren't necessarily going to give you a second chance to capture them by reading the second book, but also that first book in a series later on down the track is going to do the heavy lifting of your marketing for that series. And so you have to get that first one right. And I mean, we talked to, again, authors that we've had on the podcast who, with the benefit of hindsight, recognize that and often will either rewrite that first book or take that like reorder things, you know, if it's possible.
I think from memory, I think that's what Zoe York had said she did. She changed it so that the second book was the first book. And I think this is another suggestion. So if this is you're a new author and this is your first ever book, consider, I don't know, this is like blasphemy to authors, so I'm sorry, but consider writing a first book as a practice book.
Yes.
And not publishing it, and then writing a second book.
Publishing it, but not pinning all your hopes on it. You know, if you want the experience
practice,
of loading it, just make a practice one.
Just understand when you're writing it that, you know, if you're not following all the guidelines, and they are only guidelines, nothing's set in stone, that maybe it won't do as well. If that's okay with you, then fine, then just publish it. But, you know, if not, then, you know, maybe just use it as a test case. Learn how to do everything, even like loading to Amazon, all that sort of thing. But just maybe not press publish.
And then know that the second book is going to be the powerhouse that you've can start the new series with. So once you've got your genre and you know your tropes, and you've looked up comp books to make sure that there's other books that are, you know, in this genre and with these tropes out there that are selling well. Another thing to think about is maybe characters in the cast of characters. So I mentioned before having alpha heroes is a big thing. I think like they're pretty popular. I wouldn't go too far. Although there is a thing called a cinnamon roll hero, which is I think essentially a beta hero. I'm not really 100% certain.
Although I do like cinnamon.
Cinnamon rolls are nice.
Yes, they are nice.
Well, yeah, there's the whole debate, isn't there, about icing or not? But that's another discussion.
It has to be the icing. Like, who would not have icing on a cinnamon?
Got to have
too sweet. I've got a sweet tooth. Man, some of those cinnamon rolls where they pour the icing on the top.
It's just sacrilege. Oh my gosh! Of course you have the icing.
All right then.
Then you lose the whole cinnamon thing. Otherwise, it's just like
you can get rid of the cinnamon. Actually, let's just not have cinnamon on the cinnamon roll.
Back to writing.
So, cast of characters. So there's a couple of things that I want you to think about. And one, for example, is if you have an alpha a-hole, I have recently figured out that you need to give him a tortured past to make him.
He's got to have a reason for being.
He's got to be a reason.
Otherwise,
he's
just an a-hole.
He's nobody wants to know him.
Yeah. So
no, you better be out rescuing puppies on the side. Just saying.
Yeah, he's got to have reasons for it, and he's got to be rescuing puppies. So just remember that when you're constructing this character, don't just make them a complete jerk and then have nothing behind it. And another big thing that I think people love is having a cast of characters around them and some kind of a thing that joins them together. So
some kind of community, whether it's like a family. Think of Bella Andres or Sullivan. Remember when she came out? I mean, that was a few years ago now, and it was the Sullivan cousins she was on too. But initially it was like a big family, you know.
They're all connected by that Sullivan name, or like they're all firemen in a firehouse, or they're part of the same guild, or something. You know, they're a small town community somehow. But you want those kind of characters so that the person reading it can feel part of a tribe is essentially it. Like they're part of something, and these books are a part of a place that they would want to be, and kind of know why the readers are reading your books. So for example, for urban fantasy, I often think of it's people who kind of looking for adventure but maybe don't have it in their daily life, and so they read it to get that adventure. But if people are looking for if they're reading because they love the romance, you've got to make sure that you have the romance in there and the right kind of romance, and that you know that's what you focus on. Or if they're looking to be part of something, which is often I think why people read, is wanting to feel part of something different or something.
Absolutely. And I mean that's often an idyllic sort of thing, isn't it? You know, that happy family where there's 8 gorgeous brothers kind of thing.
Of course, get on, and all have amazing careers.
Well, they might fight, but they've always got each other's back.
Sorry, excuse me, but they can.
And then, all right, Enzo. And then also having the continuity of certain characters that a reader's fallen in love with, and suddenly they pop up in the second book, or even further down the track. I think that's a great way to pull in readers and keep them.
Yeah. So if anyone's watching the video, Shah's cat has come to visit and is not watching the video.
At home.
He's okay. okay, we're just going to sit here quietly. And no.
As long as he's not licking his bottom, that's fine.
He's no. And I've made sure to hold his tail down when he walked past the camera too.
Good.
So
Awesome.
I'm aware that, this is highly unprofessional. But just
that's
shout
just
out
us.
to former podcast guest Zoe York. She's written a really good series for writers, non-fiction series, but her one called Romance Your Brand, Building a Marketable Genre Fiction Series is really, really well worth the read.
Yeah.
So just putting that out there as well.
Yeah. So that's, what else have we got for getting it right from the first book? What do we want to suggest in terms of the cast of characters, or how to go about writing it?
Well, maybe the place is also important, like knowing your setting. I mean, obviously, well, for the most part, it's going to be fictional. So, yeah, I don't know. I think sometimes even just drawing a loose map of where everybody is and what everybody's doing, so that the reader actually can get a visual. I like that. I love to read stuff like that. If I can, not down to the nitty gritty, but, you could look out somebody's window and you could see the town, and, it would look like that, in your mind. But, as you read the words, it just brings it to life. Is it spring? Is it summer?
That's a big one, actually.
Yeah.
Knowing the seasons and keeping an eye on the days and the times
Yeah.
and things are happening. I do that really, like, that's a big thing for me. Like, I forget about I can picture the setting in my head, but I don't always describe it really well on the page. So that's what I do in a second draft. I go back and I add in those details and make it really clear. And I always get pulled up on things when I don't know something and I'm a bit vague. I just try and cover it up and pretend that I don't know it. And then that's always the thing that pretend that I know it, but I just don't mention it. Yeah. And then that's the thing that always gets picked up on. Like, someone will read it and say, oh, I was a bit unsure about this bit. And I was like, damn it, that was the bit that I was vague about. And so always be really clear.
I knew it. I think you're talking about when you get your edit back, and they always find the things that you thought you just slipped under the rug.
Yeah. But that's what you're paying for. So
that's what you're paying for. It's a good thing, by the way.
Yeah. So another thing I thought of that was really cool for your first book is I like having if you don't write it, but having a really good idea of what the hook is or what the blurb would be. So before you even start writing, like, maybe have a go at writing the blurb for your book. So he was a hotshot lawyer. She was the person sent to take him down. Sparks ensued, or whatever. I don't know. But, like, so that what the and I think it's in Zoe's book, but there's a really strong kind of, who is he? Who is she? What's the conflict? What's keeping them apart? There's a real sort of that you could just do in a blurb and know, and then as you're writing, use it as your guide. Is this still happening? Is that conflict still there? Is it?
If not, then maybe you need to change the blurb.
Yeah, I mean, you don't have to not change the blurb, but it just gives you a really good sense of what you should be aiming for. And also taglines, like kind of knowing that you've got a really strong tagline right from the start is a really powerful thing. So think of those.
A good example of taglines is actually going over to Cher's Alter Ego's genre. Cozy Mysteries have got some really awesome taglines there. If you want to see that, like, there's some really cool ones, like either on the paranormal side, you've got sort of like the magical bakery, which tells you exactly what that series is about, or on the other side it could be the poodle detective, like, it's sort of it's summing up things really nice and tight like that.
That's the series name.
It's a series name, but it could also be a tagline.
Could also just be the tagline, a hook.
And that's the other thing is series name, actually. Having your series name be indicative of the type of book it is really helpful as well. Like, don't be too obtuse. Say it how it is. So, for example, if you're writing I don't know, small town romance set in a seaside community in, say, I don't know, Australia. So calling something like Paradise Cove or something like that, which immediately tells you seaside, that kind of thing is really helpful, rather than Lost Souls, of the desert. Or maybe the desert would also tell, but maybe like the Lost Souls series or something like that is a little vague. Oh, sorry, this cat is being such a pain. So...
And there's actually also kind of when you think about it in those terms, things that are common for different genres.
Yeah.
So like Paradise Cove versus if it was urban fantasy or thriller, you would have a very different feel for certain things. And it's interesting because I've been working with my husband on certain marketing things, and I'm constantly having to remind, say the same thing to him. It's kind of like, it's not about what we like. We're talking about covers and marketing materials. It's like, it's not about what we like the best. It's about what tells the reader that this is about, if that makes sense. Like,
a pretty cover means nothing if it doesn't say what the book is about.
So you kind of got to know, and it's sort of what Chris Fox said to us that time, is about the symbolism, like without really knowing necessarily, without being able to articulate it, readers do know automatically and understand the symbolism that's there. So for example, if you saw a book and it said I don't know, whatever, but it was something, the Paradise Cove series, they would kind of understand and know that it was probably going to be a kind of a holiday romance kind of, there was going to be that kind of a vibe to it. Versus if it was like Death Skull Island or something like it.
It wouldn't be called Paradise anything, would it?
No, like if it's Death Skull Island, you kind of know that it's not a romance, except in maybe some kind of urban fantasy kind of realm. So you kind of know, like, even that sort of thing is giving you an indication, and coming right down to things like names, and it's all through our books. We kind of know that there'll be things that people will kind of immediately know, oh, this is that kind of book, and this is going to be the book that I like to read.
It's about meeting expectations. It's not about writing to formula. It's about understanding the reader expectations of the people that you want to read that book, and that's what it is. And I think when you're doing your comparable study for tropes and where it fits, where your idea fits, while you're doing that, is keep a record of the covers too. It will save you going back in the future times. Just do the old save the picture and stick them all in a Word doc or whatever. It does help. And again, if you buy that Colytics thing, he does go over the covers as well of the top ones and that subgenre. And it just, you don't have to buy the reports, but what it does is, if you've got a good idea, it for example, a sweet romance or a mystery series, it saves you time. It's the old story. You can find all this stuff out free, but paying money for some reputable things saves you time, and that's all there is to it, really.
And it's not just the covers, although covers are obviously a very big part of it. It's the kind of words and the way things are put across, like in the title and the subtitle, but also the blurb. So, and again, Chris Fox talked to us about this, about how he said, 28 million years ago, blah blah blah. Like, there were certain things that he'd said in his blurb that were, to him, and I understood exactly what he was talking about, were a symbol, or it showed that the readers who are wanting to read his book, like, if you're a romance reader, and there's this big thing about how 28 million years ago this race was most powerful and they've been destroyed, you'd be kind of like, what? Really? That doesn't sound that interesting. But we're not, you're not the target reader for that book, right? And he's looking for the people who go, oh my God, that sounds amazing. And that's
and the same thing is, like, you can't necessarily use the hero as a alpha asshole, but you could say for a Regency romance, if you say the arrogant Duke or the devilish rake, that kind of a shorthand for exactly what that is. So think of the just think of it's the little things like that, and it can be really hard to think of these things before you start, but if you're just putting a little bit of planning into it, it can make the journey a little bit shorter for you. So
I mean, if you're a plotter and a planner, then these things will fall into place quite naturally. But if you are a pantser, then just having that little bit, like Trudy suggested, having the tagline or the hook or a little bit of a blurb, that's going to help you, just having it on one side of you while you're working, and that you can keep going back to. I think it will just push you along.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Even knowing that he needs to be a jerk.
Yes.
Because that's the kind of book that you're writing, versus him being the bastard son of blah blah, having those kind of things in mind before you start is uber helpful.
Totally. And sorry, that's all right. My thought's gone. Carry on.
Another one to think about is the point of view and the tense that you're writing in. So that's a big deal too, because so it used to be everything had to be done in third person and nothing was done in first person, for example. And now there's a lot of romance that's done in first person. And then I accidentally, I'll be very honest here, it's a complete accident. I didn't mean to do it, but I wrote, so my books are, a lot of them are now in first person present tense, which is actually, it would be better if it was past tense. And I'm thinking of writing the next book I write in past tense. But anyway, next series, I have to keep the same series in the same tense. But so don't do things like, okay, so look at the genre that you're planning to write in, read a range of books from that genre. And while you're picking up things like what are the tropes that are popular, look at how they're written in terms of the tense and whether it's past tense, present tense, and the first person
and
or
if you're somebody
third
like
person.
me, you have to actually Google what first person present is. I couldn't tell you if you paid me. I know what first person is. It's as the characters speaking themselves.
Yeah, so it's inside the head, first person.
And they're doing it now
and it's like he says instead of he said.
Right.
So
and is that present?
So I'm going to do this.
So you don't have to explain it now, but just know that not all of us know this.
Sorry, all you need to do is go and work out what the other books that are comparable to the book that you want to write are going to be in, and copy them.
And look in the top of that genre. Don't just look at any old books in there. Look at the top in that genre, and look at the top in that paid in that genre, not in free, because that will give you a better indication of which books are selling in which tense. And and certainly which genres are okay with that tense.
And some of them are 50-50, but some of them are very much skew one way or the other.
Yes.
And readers skew one way or the other. So some readers will say, I'm not reading any first person stuff. I hate that. It has to all be third person. And you can't do an awful lot about that. But
I would say
be aware, don't do it
as third person, but romantic comedy is quite happily first person.
Yeah.
Not always, but quite happily. And the same with cozy mysteries. I would say it's kind of like a 50-50 thing.
Yeah.
And knowing that is important.
And it changes too, as do like fashions change, so do cover fashions, so do blurb fashions, and so do tense fashions. First person in romance used to be very unusual.
And now it's all over the show. And I get it, because
it started
first person
off in young adult, and then it moved to sort of new adult, which is kind of your college age, and then particularly for some of the really darker ones, they're often first person as well,
because it's really more personal. It's like you're getting right inside of the head of the person that it's about. Like those ones often, because it used to be that, for example, in romance you would have a chapter in the woman's head and a chapter in the man's head and a chapter, and now quite often it's like really first person. You're right in the head of the protagonist, and you never leave her head, and you're following through with her, and that's,
which, to me, must be so difficult, because you can't know what the other
you don't have another skew.
You got to put everything through there. That must be quite immersive. How's that for a big word?
But then I prefer it in some ways. Like I'm kind of, I actually so it doesn't,
makes me uncomfortably close.
Well, it doesn't give you any opportunity to know how the other person is feeling. You can only surmise, that they're
they can tell you via dialogue, right?
Well, yeah.
I love you, and I'll give you.
Yeah.
I don't have any hang-ups. I just like third person from a distance. I don't want to know your deep.
Oh my gosh. That makes a lot of sense, actually, Charlotte.
It does.
I'm very uncomfortable with all of that. It's all a bit touchy-feely for me. Thank you very much.
Actually, another thing that's kind of the same in the similar vein is how it's written, because there are a lot of books now that seem to be really short sentences and are quite choppy and fast.
Yes.
And for example, shorter chapters as well. Like I'm definitely writing shorter chapters than I used to, versus other genres that don't like that. And if you wrote a choppy book with short sentences in it, they would be not happy with you. So so for example, fantasy, I would suggest that fantasy, you should be having longer sentences and, well, maybe mixed up or whatever. But and I've read a few romances recently that are very kind of that kind of short, choppy, fast kind of thing going on. And so it's just another thing.
Yeah, probably not historical romance.
No,
that probably wouldn't. They would still have the longer sentences and paragraphs.
And that definitely does change how the feel of the book too. Like if it's,
it does.
So just think about that.
And also by the same token, the actual length of the book too. There's some genres that can do, cope with you, if you like, with a shorter word count. Others, it's a longer word count, and it tends to be very subgenre specific. That's not to say you can't, it's not, I mean, what we're suggesting here is kind of things to think about. We're not saying, as Cheryl said before, it's not set in stone, but these are observations over many, many, many years of people that are really successful selling commercial fiction, and this is a kind of thing that they're aware of and they're doing. And again, just from a really granular level, if you like, having a getting a BookBub featured deal, which is kind of the gold standard for advertising lists, is really, you can't do it on a book that's less than 150 pages long. So it's that kind of thing, thinking a little bit ahead about that. If you're wanting to launch a series and it's novellas only, that's fine, but just understand that that will be taken out. So it's that kind of thing you're thinking about.
I think even ENT, e-read and news today, I think even though you cannot promote a book under 150 pages in certain ads.
And so there's also just slight diversion onto serials as well. So serials is where you're telling the story in parts, kind of like episodic television. That was huge, particularly in paranormal romance about, I want to say, gosh, time's flying, more than 5 years ago. It's kind of fallen out of favor a bit, but that was, a lot of people did really well in that. With the advent of Kindle Unlimited, it can be a lot harder making money from shorter books. So I think my advice would always be probably to write 50,000 words plus, no matter what, just because if you're spending money to advertise that particular book, then your read through is going to be worth it. Whereas if you're spending that same amount of money and your book's only 30,000 words, you're just not going to get the, particularly if you're going, which reminds me,
we haven't spoken about that.
Kindle Unlimited or Amazon exclusive, selling exclusive to Amazon versus wide as well. Just something to have in the back of your mind as well. And we've done podcasts on just this topic alone. And again, it can be quite subgenre specific.
Yeah. So really, there's a truckload of things.
And you can think about. We've given you a list, but writing, haven't you?
Yeah. So it's not. It honestly isn't. And this isn't about writing awful books that you hate just to make money, right? This is about finding a book that you can write that you love, because we all love writing, right? Like we love writing. I love the books that I read, and the books that I write. I'm not doing any of this to kind of to take away from that. This is just, if I have a choice between two books that I love, and I know that one is going to make me more money than the other, if I know that if I write a enemies to lovers over I don't know what an example is of a less popular trope, but something that's not as popular.
A scarecrow shifter.
A scarecrow shifter versus a werewolf, let's say. Go for the werewolf. Give yourself a best, and leave that idea for the scarecrow shifter for a bit later in your career, where you've got the name and the name recognition. I mean, and you could probably sell more copies of the scarecrow shifter later on in your career because people have read your books, they know your name, and they'll read anything you write. Whereas right now we're talking about getting the most bang for your buck based on.
Right now we're talking about paying the Powerball, okay? And if you want to pay your Powerball, better put your money on a sexy werewolf than there is a scarecrow. But we're not saying don't write the scarecrow. Just to reiterate this.
How would a scarecrow shifter work?
I don't know, and I don't even know why I thought of a scarecrow shifter. But all I can say is anybody feel free to write that. Write the heck out of that scarecrow shifter.
No, don't do that.
Dedicated to Shah.
as
No, please
opposing
don't, but unless
opinions,
it's really
don't write
good.
the Scarecrow Shifter, because that sounds really weird.
It does sound
and
weird.
it's very niche. It's a bit too niche for us.
Yes.
Even
All
us.
right. Have we got anything more to add
No,
for our
we seem to have
listeners?
slightly
Deviated.
Veered
slightly
off the
deviated.
actual
All I would
topic.
say
For a
is
change.
that if you're listening
Shockingly.
to this, trying to recover from that, is we're going to have all our show notes. We're going to have all the links to what we talked about, to Zoe's podcast, her book, including Chris Fox's, Kay Lydics. We had Alex Newton on from that talking as well. So we're going to have these links on our show notes. And really, our homework for you people is to go read. How's that? That's good homework. Go read.
That's great.
Oh no, how can I ever do that?
Yeah.
But that's a big thing, right? So I sometimes get to the point where I'm like, oh, I can't read. I've got all this stuff to do. But actually, we're writers, and part of our job description is reading books by other people. So
it fills the well.
We give you permission.
It does fill the well. And it keeps you up to date. And I understand that a lot of writers don't like reading while they're particularly writing, but in the prep process, I think it's really good.
Because I heard an author saying that to me years ago. I think she's a literary fiction author from New Zealand. She said, I can't read other authors while I'm writing. And I call bull SHIT on that word, because I think that's a load of patooey, as Shah said. That's a much better word, because I think she felt like she was going to somehow plagiarize or copy.
I think that was the big fear back in the day, wasn't it, really? But I mean, that's what editors are for.
Yeah.
To find all the things that
and I just love it. I just think I read all the time now when I'm writing, and it makes me happier. It makes me a better writer. It gives me inspiration. I just think it's much better. So that's my 2 cents worth on that. You can completely disagree with me out there in the world, but
people are allowed to disagree.
Sometimes we
with us,
do,
but we're here for you. And what we would really, really, really appreciate is if you would, if you're listening to this on YouTube, I apologize for the constant cat prowling in front of the camera, but we would love it if you would subscribe, and on your podcast app, we would super love it if you would drop us a little review, because that helps other people find us, and
yes, please,
bring more of this valuable content.
Yes, it's very relevant, highly organized.
That's us.
And friendly content.
Absolutely. So go forth and write your series, people.
All right.
Awesome.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Spa Girls podcast.
Keep well.
See you
Bye.
all.
Bye.
Bye.